Imagine you're kayaking alone on a lake at dawn, barely awake, coffee still warm in your hand, when a fox emerges from the tree line. She doesn't run, she doesn't freeze, she walks directly toward you, sets something gently on the ground at the edge of the water, and steps back. It's a fox kit, eyes barely open, one leg bent at a wrong angle. The mother sits down, looks at you, and simply waits. No growling, no circling, just patience. Like she made an appointment, and you're already running late. If that sounds like something out of a children's book, you'd be surprised. Variations of that exact scenario have been documented by wildlife rehabilitators, park rangers, and ordinary people living near wild spaces more times than anyone has properly counted. And every single time it happens, the human on the receiving end asks the same question. Why me? Why now? Why would something wild, something designed by millions of years of evolution to stay as far from humans as possible, choose this moment to close that distance? The answer, it turns out, is one of the more fascinating stories in all of animal behavior. And it starts not with the animals, but with us. Humans are strange, not in the way we usually mean when we say that at a party. Strange in a deeply biological sense. We are one of the very few species on Earth that will cross significant distances, expend considerable energy, and take on real personal risk to help an infant that shares absolutely none of our DNA. We do this for other human babies, obviously, but we also do it for kittens under porches, ducklings stuck in storm drains, bear cubs separated from their mothers, and baby sea turtles pointed in the wrong direction on a beach. We just can't seem to help ourselves. Something about small, vulnerable, and struggling flips a switch in the human brain that is remarkably difficult to ignore. Here's the part that gets interesting. Animals have apparently noticed, not in a conscious, calculating way. Not like a deer sat down one afternoon and thought, you know what, those bipeds seem helpful. Let me file that away for future reference. But over generations of observation, proximity, and accumulated experience, certain animal populations have built up something that functions almost like a behavioral reputation file on our species. And in that file, under the category of what happens when something small and helpless is in trouble, humans score remarkably well. Let's start with dogs, because dogs are both the most obvious example and the one that reveals the deepest layer of this whole story. A mother dog who trusts the humans in her household will do something that still manages to be breathtaking every single time you witness it. She will pick up her puppies, one by one, and carry them directly to her favorite person. Not to hide them, not because she ran out of space in the whelping box, but because in her mind, that human is part of her family unit, and family members share responsibility for the most important things. Puppies are the most important things. This behavior didn't appear accidentally. It's the product of somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years of dogs and humans essentially growing up together, learning each other's signals, sharing food and shelter and threat responses, until the boundary between the human social group and the dog social group became genuinely blurry. Dogs didn't just learn to tolerate us. They learned to include us. And once you're included, you're on the list of people who get handed the babies during an emergency. What makes this remarkable is that the same logic, stripped of the domestication history, seems to be operating in species that have had zero formal domestication experience whatsoever. Elephants are perhaps the most dramatic example of this. Elephant herds are matriarchal, deeply intelligent, and operate on social bonds that stretch across decades. They remember individual elephants they haven't seen in years. They recognize the bones of their own dead. They mourn. And they also, in documented cases near conservation areas and wildlife sanctuaries, have been observed approaching human caretakers with injured or sick calves in ways that look unmistakably deliberate. Not panicked, not accidental, deliberate. The herd holds back. The mother edges the calf forward. The humans are allowed close in a way that would be absolutely unthinkable under any other circumstance. Researchers who've studied these interactions point to a few things happening simultaneously. First, elephants in protected areas have often had years of low-conflict exposure to the same small group of humans. Rangers, researchers, sanctuary workers. These humans move predictably, smell consistently, and have never once behaved like a threat. Second, elephants have almost certainly observed humans intervening in distress situations before, either with other animals or with other elephants. They are smart enough and observant enough to connect those dots. Third, and maybe most importantly, elephants seem capable of something researchers call cross-species empathy recognition, which is a technical way of saying they can tell when a being from a completely different species is trying to help rather than harm. That last one is worth sitting with for a moment, because it changes the picture significantly. We're not just talking about animals that tolerate humans. We're talking about animals that can read human intention well enough to make a judgment call about whether a particular human, in a particular moment, is safe enough to trust with something irreplaceable. Crows have been doing this for years, and most people have no idea. Crows are arguably one of the most cognitively sophisticated birds on the planet. They use tools, they plan, they hold what looks genuinely like grudges against specific people who've wronged them, sometimes passing that hostility onto their offspring. But they also do the reverse. Crows that have had positive interactions with specific humans, a person who regularly left peanuts out, someone who once helped a grounded fledgling, will return to that human with gifts, small shiny objects, interesting bits of debris, and occasionally, in a behavior that birders and wildlife rehabilitators have reported multiple times, injured or vulnerable young birds. The crow doesn't bring the chick to just anyone. It brings it to the specific human who has already demonstrated, through repeated reliable behavior, that they are the kind of entity who responds to vulnerability with care. That's not instinct in any simple sense. That's memory, pattern recognition, and something that functions like trust operating across the boundary between species. Now here's a layer of this story that gets genuinely strange. Some of this trust appears to be transferable, not just learned by individual animals, but passed along within social groups to animals that have never had direct positive contact with the human in question. Young crows raised by parents who have a positive association with a specific person seem to inherit a lower fear response toward that person before any independent interaction has occurred. Young elephants in herds with long histories of peaceful human contact show measurably lower stress responses to human proximity than elephants from herds without that history. Even in cat colonies, kittens born to mothers with established human trust relationships approach humans earlier and with less hesitation than kittens from feral lines with no such history. This suggests something remarkable, that the trust being extended to humans in these moments isn't purely the product of individual experience. It's something more like a socially transmitted assessment, a reputation that moves through a population the way information moves through any tight-knit community. Carefully, selectively, based on accumulated evidence, but real. Of course, it's important not to get so swept up in the beautiful version of this story that we miss the more complicated one. Not every animal that approaches a human with a baby is making a calculated trust decision. Sometimes something much simpler and much more urgent is happening. Desperation has its own logic. A mother animal facing a threat she cannot handle, a predator, a flood, or an injury, will sometimes make choices that wouldn't make sense under calmer conditions. Humans, from the perspective of most wildlife, are large, loud, and chemically complex. We don't smell like predators. We don't move like predators. In a moment of acute crisis, when every familiar option has been exhausted, the nearest large non-predatory presence, which is often a human, can become a default. Not because the animal trusts us, but because we're the least bad option currently available. Even that, though, tells you something. For a wild animal to classify humans as the least bad option in a crisis, rather than simply another threat to flee from, something has already shifted in how that animal processes our presence. We've moved, at minimum, from active danger to neutral unknown, and in some cases, clearly, much further than that. There's a chemical dimension to this that rarely makes it into casual conversation. Mammals have extraordinarily sophisticated scent memories. A dog can identify a specific person by smell months after a single brief interaction. Bears in areas with long human contact show different cortisol responses to familiar human scent versus unfamiliar human scent. It's entirely plausible that part of what's happening in these baby-delivering moments is scent-based. A specific human, smelled repeatedly in non-threatening contexts, gets cataloged at a neurological level as safe. Not safe like a member of the same species, but safe like a known quantity, predictable, non-hostile. And in the animal world, predictability is basically a superpower. The prime examples are where this all starts feeling uncomfortably close to home. Chimpanzees, bonobos, and several monkey species living near long-term research stations have been documented behaving in ways toward familiar human researchers that they simply don't extend to strangers, allowing closer proximity, showing relaxed body language, and in several recorded cases, bringing injured or orphaned infants toward the human rather than away. Primates already practice what researchers call cooperative infant care, where members of a social group other than the biological mother take active roles in caring for young. It's not a huge cognitive leap for an animal already wired for that kind of social flexibility to occasionally extend that framework across species lines when a long-term human presence has been thoroughly integrated into the social landscape. The human researcher, after years of calm, consistent, non-threatening presence, stops being an outsider in any meaningful functional sense. They become something like a peripheral member of the group. And peripheral group members in primate society sometimes get handed the baby, There's a theory that attempts to formalize all of this, sometimes called the interspecies attachment framework. The basic idea is that certain cognitively complex animals are capable of forming something that resembles an attachment relationship with specific humans. Not the same as the attachment between a parent and offspring. Not as deep or as instinctive, but structurally similar in that it involves a specific individual being categorized as safe, reliable, and worth seeking out during moments of stress or vulnerability. If that framework is real, and the behavioral evidence suggests it might be, then these moments of animals bringing babies to humans aren't anomalies at all. They're the framework doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's also worth noting what these moments tend to have in common across species. They rarely happen in areas with high hunting pressure. They rarely involve species with recent histories of significant human conflict. They cluster around places and relationships with long track records of low-threat coexistence, protected areas, research stations, feeding programs, sanctuaries, individual homes where an animal has been quietly watched and fed for years without incident. That pattern matters. It means this behavior isn't something animals do toward humans in general. It's something they do toward specific humans, in specific contexts, after specific histories have been established. The trust is not species-wide, it's personal, and that makes it, somehow, more meaningful rather than less. Conservation biologists have started paying closer attention to these interactions, not just as heartwarming anecdotes, but as actual data. A wild population willing to approach humans with vulnerable young is, in a measurable sense, a population existing in a relatively low-stress relationship with the humans in its environment. These moments function almost like a behavioral indicator, a sign that something in the human-wildlife dynamic in that area is working the way it ideally should. Which brings us to what might be the most important thing about this entire phenomenon. It runs in both directions. Every person who has ever had a wild animal bring them something vulnerable, a kitten, a calf, a chick, a pup, describes the experience as transformative in a way that's surprisingly consistent across wildly different people in wildly different circumstances. Something about being trusted with something that precious, by something that had every evolutionary reason not to trust you, fundamentally changes how you think about your relationship to the living world around you. Rangers become more committed. Rehabilitators burn out less quickly. Ordinary people start paying attention to their local wildlife in ways they never did before. The animal brought a baby. The human got a reminder of something they'd maybe half forgotten, that the world is full of minds assessing and remembering and making judgments, quietly, constantly, generation after generation, and that the judgments those minds make about us are not fixed, they're earned. Interaction by interaction, season by season, year by year. So when you hear about a dolphin surfacing beside a fishing boat with an entangled calf, when you see a video of a wild bird landing on someone's shoulder with a grounded chick, when a fox emerges from a tree line at dawn and sets something carefully at the water's edge and simply waits, don't just feel good about it, understand what it actually represents. A ledger is being settled. A long, patient, mostly unwitnessed accumulation of evidence finally adds up to a conclusion. This one is safe. This one will help. We didn't earn that conclusion easily. We don't always deserve it, but every time it happens, it's proof that earning it is possible. And maybe that's worth more than we typically give it credit for.